In 1992, Image Comics launched and rocked the foundations of the big two publishers. In response, Marvel and DC set aside past differences and, in true superhero fashion, decided to team up in an attempt to defeat their common enemy. This resulted in a team-up between two of the respective companies' oldest characters, Batman and Captain America. For a brief period in the late 70s, early 80s, Marvel and DC worked happily together on a handful of crossovers. 1976's Superman vs. The Amazing Spider-Man garnered a follow-up, and then team-ups between Batman and the Hulk and the Uncanny X-Men and the New Teen Titans followed. And that's not all. There were plans for a second X-Men Teen Titans adventure and also for a JLA Avengers crossover. However, it was during work on the latter of those two projects that the working relationship between the two publishers broke down, and the mutual distrust that arose between the two editors-in-chief meant that the era of the intercompany crossover was at an end. But necessity is the mother of invention, and when it became clear that the upstart Image Comics was not only here to stay, but was taking a bite out of their sales, the suddenly not quite so big two decided to bury the hatchet and pool their talents once more. This led to a slew of crossovers between A-listers such as Spider-Man and Batman, and even B-listers such as the Green Lantern and Silver Surfer. It also led to the biggest crossover project to date between the two companies, the legendary Marvel vs. DC miniseries, which itself led to the Amalgam Universe. Has it gone yet? If you pick amongst the debris of those 1990s projects, you will find one that was a real labour of love for its creator. And yes, I said creator, singular. It is, of course, what else were you expecting? Batman and Captain America. Now, usually at this point, I would say that I'm not really familiar with the DC character, and I would take a look at an issue of their comic that was contemporaneous with the crossover. However, on this occasion, that wouldn't really work, because the Batman-Captain America crossover wasn't set in contemporary 1996. It was set in the 1940s. So I suppose it would make more sense to look at something like this. It's a reprint. Detective Comics issue 38 was released just 2 years after Bob Kane and Bill Finger's Caped Crusader made his debut in 1939. This issue clearly represents a milestone in the life of Batman. There's nothing else to say, is there? Let's get stuck in. This is a genuine piece of comic book history that I hold in my hands here, albeit a reprint. And didn't DC know it, as they announce that they present the sensational character find of 1940. Batman at last takes under his protective mantle an ally in his relentless fight against crime, introducing an exciting new figure whose incredible gymnastic and athletic feats will astound you. I'll be the judge of that. A laughing, fighting young daredevil who scoffs at danger like the legendary Robin Hood, whose name and spirit he has adopted. Robin, the boy wonder. Well, that's interesting. I never knew he took his name from Robin Hood. I always assumed it was something to do with the bird, especially with the Robin Redbreast association, with him wearing a red tunic. Our tale begins in the Circus Big Top, where we see the family trapeze act, the Flying Graysons. Mother, father and son Dick are all part of the act. And one night after the show is over, Dick passes by the owner of the circus, Mr. Halley's office, when he overhears a conversation. It seems a couple of the local toughs are trying to extract protection money from Mr. Halley. And when he says he will have nothing to do with it, they warn him that accidents will happen. And these are particularly efficient gangsters, because it's just the very next night, when there just so happens to be a Mr. Wayne in the audience, that their warning comes true. Dick isn't performing when it happens, but both of his parents are, as the ropes that hold their trapezes aloft snap, and both of them plummet to their deaths. The gangsters soon pay another visit to Mr. Halley and say, what a shame about the accident, let's hope that no more happen. Because of this, he agrees to pay up. He doesn't want anybody else to lose their life. But for one young lad, too many lives have already been lost. As Dick, once more listening at the door, decides to go to the police. But he is advised not to do that. It's Batman. He says he wants the gangsters brought to justice just as much as Dick does. But Dick can't go to the police, because if he does, he'll be dead within an hour, because the whole town is run by Boss Zuko. Instead, they hop in Batman's car, and he suggests he takes Dick back to his home and hides him there for a while. Do these car doors open? But that isn't enough to scare the young lad. In fact, the pair bond, as Batman explains that he became the vigilante that he is because his parents were also killed by a criminal. This convinces Dick that they are like-minded individuals, and he says, "Take me with you, please." And so it is that Bruce Wayne begins to train the young lad, and he excels. Of course, he was in the circus, and he says, "I've been doing this since I was 4 years old." And actually, that makes sense as to why he is such an acrobatic and physically able sidekick, more so than any other young lad who just wanted to fight crime. But it's not just the acrobatic stuff. Bruce also teaches him how to fight. And he says, "Do it right, and you can hit as hard as any featherweight champ." Featherweight? That's damning with faint praise, isn't it? Again, he learns fast, and soon Dick Grayson dons his new costume, and Robin, the boy wonder, is born. So what about Boss Zuko? Well, the next day, their plan begins to form. Bruce tells Dick that he needs to get a job as a newsboy, and we should have known that Bruce was a pipe smoker, shouldn't we? Before long, newsboy Dick draws the attention of some local toughs who say they want a cut of his takings. Bruce is happy with this and says, "Fine, carry on as you are, everything's going to plan." The next time that Dick is visited by these toughs, he follows them as instructed by Bruce, and they lead him to Boss Zuko's house. Despite being a big gangland boss, Zuko doesn't want any of the small fish to escape his net. He says that not only does he want to continue getting a cut of the newsboys' money and other small businesses, but he wants even more from them. So, starting tomorrow night, his men have to put on even more pressure to get that extra money from them. Dick knows he needs to tell Batman this straight away. So when the gang start to put pressure on these people the very next night, Batman is waiting for them. Beginning at a tailor store, where he makes short shrift of those two, and then moving on to such other big money ventures as a butcher's and a gambling house. Well, that's fair enough. They must have loads of money. "It's the Batman. He's on our 1980s dance floor. Get him." And here's a quality punch. 3 people with one swing. Very impressive. During the fight, he also manages to overturn all of the casino's takings onto the floor, causing chaos as all the patrons scramble to hoover it up. And then he leaves, saying, "Adieu, gentlemen. I hope I haven't caused any disturbance." "You know full well you have, mister." I tell you what, Boss Zuko isn't happy either. He is sick and tired of hearing about the Batman. That guy walks in and out of his places and nobody stops him. He isn't going to stand for it. At that point, a delivery arrives. It's a box, and from inside the box flies a bat. Also, there's a note in the box. Oh, who's that from? It's from Batman. Oh. It says he knows that Zuko is trying to get protection money from the company that is putting up the Cayman building. He says, "Stay away, because I'm protecting that building, so definitely don't come there, because I definitely won't be expecting you. P.S. This isn't a trap." Well, Zuko isn't going to let anyone speak to him like that. So he takes his men to the Cayman building, but he doesn't just find a bat waiting there for him. Because Robin, the boy wonder, finally gets a taste of the action. And with that smile on his face, he clearly enjoys his work. And like I said, him being an athletic sidekick makes sense. Apart from his uncanny accuracy with a slingshot, all of the swinging around and somersaults seems perfectly normal for someone who's brought up in a trapeze act. And he makes short work of the gang. Although, don't any of them own a gun? They're a gang, for crying out loud. He has one final gymnastic manoeuvre to perform, as a particularly brave gangster walks out on the top of a girder, thinking he's going to stamp on Robin's fingers, only for the boy wonder to swing under the girder and launch his assailant into the sky. So, he's dead. Now we find out why Zuko's the boss. It's because he actually has a gun, and he's not afraid to use it, if he has the opportunity, which he doesn't. Is that a pun from Batman, or is he just painfully polite? One of Zuko's henchmen tries to run off, but as he does, a rope drops down and loops around his neck, pulling him off the girder. Batman, then trying to get a confession out of him, says, "In this vial I've got acid, the same acid that Blade put on the trapeze of the Flying Graysons. And unless he confesses, Batman is going to put it on that rope, eating away at it and dropping Blade to the ground far below. And he doesn't want that. But he's hanging him. But Blade must have strong neck muscles, because he is soon singing like a canary, pointing the finger squarely at his boss. Zuko really doesn't appreciate this, and so to eliminate this key witness, he pushes Blade from the top of the building, sending him falling to his death. But don't worry about the dead gangster, this is all part of the plan. Because as Zuko pushed him off, Robin snaps a photo, and that photo is all the evidence they need to put Zuko away for murder. And this is a definite pun from Batman, as he says, "Boss Zuko, your boss will be the electric chair." That's a bit in bad taste, isn't it? Mind you, this is the guy that set up that gangster to die just so he could get some evidence. What does he care about bad taste? Zuko is found guilty of murder, and the governor swears he will clean up politics. It's all turned out beautifully. Bruce asks Dick if he's going to go back to the circus life, but Dick says no. He thinks his mother and father would like him to go on fighting crime and killing people. So Bruce says, "Okay, you reckless young murderer. But instead of jumping those men alone, why didn't you wait for me?" And Dick says, I didn't want to miss any of the fun." The kid is a genuine psychopath. Anyway, that is the end of that tale. It was only 12 pages long, but there's still lots more content in this comic, and it really lives up to its title of Detective Comics. Because we have other comic strips in it called Spy, Red Logan, who is an ace reporter, is there any other kind? Speed Saunders, a private eye. Steve Malone, district attorney. Slam Bradley, a private detective, written by Superman co-creator Jerry Siegel. Adventurer Cliff Crosby. And the Crimson Avenger. You certainly got a lot for your money back then. Well, times have changed, haven't they? But at least I now know what Batman was like in the 1940s. But are you thinking what I'm thinking? What was Cap like in the 40s? Well, there's only one way to find out. This too is a reprint, but not a reprint of the original comic. Fantasy Masterpieces launched in the mid-60s and was not only an anthology series, but an anthology of reprints series. As the name suggests, it started out featuring tales of aliens and other outlandish creatures, but once Captain America made an appearance in issue 3, he never left. These were reprints of stories that first featured in the Golden Age Captain America comics, and other Golden Age characters such as the Submariner and the original Human Torch were quick to jump on board. Issue 12 saw it renamed Marvel Superheroes, and although it was still an anthology title, it began featuring original stories, including the debut of the Guardians of the Galaxy, yes, that is them, and more famously, Captain Marvel. As interesting as both of those sound, today we're looking at issue 8, cover dated April 1967. Within these covers is a reprint of a story that originally appeared in issue 7 of Captain America comics from 1941, published not by Marvel, but their predecessor, Timely Comics. Not only is Cap a living legend, but so too were the team that worked on this story, because they were the Star-Spangled Avengers' original creators, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. Simon was primarily a writer, but not exclusively so, and as an artist he created characters such as the Fiery Mask for Timely Comics. But he was still in the very earliest days of his comic book career when he met Kirby. Jack Kirby had been an artist for a few years longer, working on newspaper comic strips and also with comic book packagers Eisner and Iger. In 1940, he launched Blue Beetle, a character owned these days by DC Comics. Joe Simon joined him on issue 2 of that character's title, before the pair worked on Fawcett Comics' Captain Marvel and then jointly moved to Timely Comics. There they created Captain America in late 1940, a character who was massively popular from his introduction. So this is still the early days of that character. Let's have a look at it, shall we? After all, it can't be as crazy as that Batman story, can it? Our story opens in the home of Senator Alvin Benson after a dreary, uneventful day. Well, that's what it says here anyway. He wants to unwind by listening to the radio, but discovers that it will only tune in to one station, WLM. He finds this odd, but nonetheless is happy to listen to that station. His newly employed butler, however, doesn't find this so unusual. After dismissing his butler for the night, he is enthralled by a violin solo. He says it's amazing, with notes that he has never heard before. But as they reach an incredible pitch, the radio explodes, killing the senator. We then see an announcer read out a news flash about the death of the senator. If this was in a modern day comic, we would see it as a pastiche, maybe even a parody of old-fashioned newscasting. However, this came out in 1941, so it would have been an earnest attempt at reflecting what happens in the newsroom. The spectacled announcer, hair swept back, has his notes in his hand, hunched over the microphone. And you just know that he sounds like this. In another reflection of contemporary 1941, we join Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes in their military camp, Camp Lehigh. The United States had not yet joined the Second World War, but Steve Rogers was always up for it. Listening to the radio as Steve smokes his pipe, they hear a report about the senator's death, and we are told that he was a strong supporter of aid to Britain and a violent Nazi hater. These were the big issues of the day that this story was originally released, whether or not to send aid to Britain to help them in the war effort. What level of threat the Nazis provided. It may sound crazy, but it makes it feel like this is a genuine historical document. That night, Cap and Bucky decide to investigate. Hiding in the shadows outside the senator's house, they learn that the butler was the last person to see him alive. Although the butler tells the inspector that he saw nothing suspicious. The poor senator was just listening to the radio. The police leave, believing that the butler can provide no more useful information to them. But once he is left alone, he rummages amongst the debris of the explosion and finds a fragment. But if only he had thought that rather than said it out loud, because he was overheard, and Captain America wants to know what it is a fragment of. The butler actually has some moves, but once he's been softened up by a child, Cap puts him out for the count. And then our heroes discover that that fragment looks like the fragment of a bomb. Whilst they mull this over, they return to camp and change back into their military uniforms. The sergeant has a surprise for them. The whole regiment is going out, wouldn't you know it, to a classical concert. It's a hell of a concert from a hell of a violinist who plays the most unusual notes that penetrate the ear and probe the brain. And this is a concert that is also being broadcast live on the radio. As the regiment leaves the theatre, they see the latest edition of the newspaper bearing a headline that a second anti-Nazi senator has died in an explosion during that concert. Wow, those printing presses don't hang around, do they? Neither does Steve and Bucky. And they quickly hot-foot it over to that senator's house, where an unwelcoming butler with a hairstyle inspired by Mr. T tells them that no visitors are allowed. This second less than friendly butler has given Steve a theory that he wants to explore. It's another plan that involves a disguise. So, with a newly fitted suit and bowler hat, Steve applies for a job as a butler at the Domestic Employment Agency. Sadly though, he is told that there are no vacancies at the moment. However, as he leaves, another shady-looking applicant passes him, and that applicant is told they have just the job for him. This proves to Steve that his hunch was right. The agency is just a front for the head man to get his pro-Nazi agents into the homes of anti-Nazi senators. That's a bit of a leap, isn't it? Just because he didn't get a job, maybe his resume wasn't up to scratch. Despite his theory crystallising, Cap still doesn't know who the head man is or how he is causing these explosions. What he does know is that there is another concert in town tonight, and he wants Bucky to attend and never let that unusual fiddler out of his sight. At the home of Senator Shaw's, his new butler asks to excuse himself for the night, because the senator is going to listen into the concert, and the butler says he doesn't much care for music. But there is a certain sentinel of liberty there who would prefer the butler to stay. Cap is insistent that the butler stays to listen to the concert, but the butler is equally insistent that he doesn't, and Cap asks, is the fact that a certain violinist is on the air the thing that's putting him off? Meanwhile, at the concert hall, the fiddler introduces his next and final piece, adding, "The Führer will reward me well for this week's work." Ha 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 ha. You do realise that microphone's on, don't you? Then, as the performance begins and is broadcast to the nation, in the home of Senator Shaw's, his butler begins to panic. Cap presses him as to why he is so concerned. Is it because the radio is going to explode? And in desperation that, oh crikey, wow, Jack Kirby's art really was still developing. Anyway, in his desperation, the butler confesses, as long as Cap turns the radio off. But Cap wants more. Who is it that's behind these blasts? And in a revelation that shocks nobody, Cap is told it's the fiddler. His highest note will kill them all. Of course, they were never in any real danger because Cap had already removed a device that the butler had put into the radio earlier on. A device that was sensitive to sound, and at the sound of a very high-pitched note, it would ignite and detonate a bomb. The butler doesn't take this turn of events well and attacks Cap, as if he ever stood any chance of winning. Cap flattens him, using the power of irony to send him into the radio set. But what about Bucky? Well, he still has work to do, and he has followed the fiddler back to his dressing room. But the fiddler knew he was being followed, and deals with Bucky as he enters the room. Bucky is still conscious though, which suits the fiddler just fine, because he is going to finish the lad off with his bizarre fiddle. But Bucky seems resilient to the uncanny notes, so the fiddler plays harder, higher, even higher. Yeah, like I said, the art style was still developing. But enough time has been bought for Cap to arrive at the scene, just in time to see the fiddler keel over, dead. As Cap says, it's a very appropriate ending for the villain. So why wasn't Bucky affected by the music? Because Cap had already previously warned him to put cotton in his ears. Then we return to Camp Lehigh, and I've got a feeling this is going to be a light-hearted ending. Yeah, it is, because Bucky has won the regiment's raffle. And when our heroes are told that the first prize is a brand new violin, the pair of them faint on the spot, in a moment that really should be accompanied by a sound effect. They don't end stories like that anymore, do they? Well, we've seen both characters in their golden age glory now, so let's move forward 50 plus years to see how they fared at the hands of another legendary comic book creator. John Byrne had established himself as a major player in the comic book industry in the 1980s, after top-notch runs on titles such as The Fantastic Four and Alpha Flight, and also by literally redefining Superman. He made his name not only as the writer, but also the artist on each of those titles, something that he was going to do on his very own intercompany crossover, Batman and Captain America. In fact, John Byrne appears to have performed every role on this, except for colorist and colour separator, which means that he was also the letterer. This wasn't unique for JB. He has enjoyed working on lettering and their fonts for a substantial chunk of his career. I guess with all of that input, that is why he chose this as one of 3 of his works that he would like buried in a time capsule for posterity. Naturally, these inter-universe stories tend to take place on alternate Earths, and this issue makes that explicitly clear from the outset, with an Elseworlds stamp on the cover. Elseworlds was DC's catch-all title for all of its tales that took place outside of its standard continuity. As always, this gave writers the freedom to do things that would otherwise be out of the question. The build-up is over. Let's see John Byrne's take on what would have happened if these 2 titans of the superhero world would have crossed paths back in the 1940s. The place is Gotham City, the year 1945, and it doesn't take long for John Byrne to show us just how much he's going to embrace the 1940s vibe of this comic. What I mean is, this came out in the 1990s, so he could easily have gone down the route of making it look like a film noir, much like Batman the animated series did. Instead, he's leaning heavily into the sometimes camp, often ridiculous world of 1940s Batman. For example, we open with a car chase where the dynamic duo are in an early version of the Batmobile and they are chasing the Joker in his very own Jokermobile, replete with Goofy face on the front of it. And that's not the last goofy vehicle we're going to see in this issue. And also, we recognise that gleeful, psychopathic smile, don't we? Where the costumes are concerned, again, there's no toning down, no subtle shades. Instead, Batman is in his blue and grey outfit, and Robin his very familiar red, green and yellow. Our heroes think they have the Joker cornered as he drives onto a pier, but no, he has a very Joker-like way of escaping, as a very overpowered ejector seat sends him into the lower atmosphere. At this point, he has of course abandoned the Jokermobile, so Batman and Robin search it for clues. And Batman finds one. Not that he tells us what it is just yet, but whilst he's examining it, Robin notices a ticking sound before the inevitable happens. I think we would have all booby-trapped it, wouldn't we? We transition quite neatly from one explosion where Batman tells Robin to get down to another, where American forces are fighting in Europe and being yelled at to get to cover. It's a small band of American troops and they are under fire from a colossal Nazi war machine. But the Americans have an advantage, in the form of the only man on the field of battle not carrying a gun. Also, we have a cameo here because that sergeant is actually DC's own Sergeant Rock. I've never read that comic myself, but I assume these characters with him are recognisable companions. Now this machine is massive. I mean, look at those people standing on the gantry. But Cap manages to get within the arc of its guns and scale the side of it. He rams his shield between some gears and the machine promptly stops and falls over. And I think it's even bigger than we thought, because look, those are houses. Sergeant Rock and his men round up the German crew, and as they're doing so, Cap and Bucky, who was keeping a respectful distance, receive orders to return to the United States for a top secret mission. But the action doesn't let up yet, because no sooner are they back in American airspace than they hear of another plane being hijacked. Cap doesn't hesitate to tell the pilot of his own plane to give chase. And just a short note, Look here at the detail in this picture, the detail of the cockpit. And that is a feature that you'll see again and again in this comic. John Byrne, despite juggling all those balls, really wasn't holding back on detailed backgrounds. How on earth can one plane save another plane from being hijacked? It can't. But one man can. Or maybe two. Because as Cap prepares to jump from their plane to the hijacked plane, he says, "Bucky, if I mess this up, it'll be up to you to try next." "Oh, yeah, fine." Cap launches himself onto the plane below, without a parachute, of course. And actually, he isn't successful. He grips, he grapples, he tries, he's shot at, but he fails to find purchase on the other plane. But he is also in luck. Batman is there, just when he was needed, because he has been training the hijacked plane in his very own ludicrous-looking bat plane, with the very unaerodynamic bat face on the plane's nose. Now, thankfully, they already know each other, so we're going to be spared the usual fight between two heroes who misunderstand each other's motives. And actually, they're a rather effective pair, as they manage to board the hijacked plane and take down the half a dozen or so hijackers. One of the villains takes it on the chin as he says, "Captain America, oomph!" Clearly, that was an opportunity for Captain America, ah! Needless to say, they don't even break sweat. Now, you may be wondering what the purpose of the hijacking was. Well, it was to effect the kidnap of someone that was on board the plane. It's only Robert Oppenheimer, father of the atomic bomb and director of the Gotham Project. Our heroes want answers from the hijackers, want to know who is behind all this. Unfortunately, their attempts are foiled because a poisoned skin patch that was on each and every member of the crew has killed them. They will take their secrets to the grave. Although they do also provide a bit of a clue. Our heroes aren't stupid and they recognise the Joker's signature. Also, Batman says that it confirms something that he's been dreading for days now, but he doesn't tell us what that is. And at that point, our heroes go their separate ways. Because, if you remember, Captain America and Bucky have got a secret mission to find out about. Steve Rogers meets up with some military top brass. They explain to him that they believe this is the third time that the Joker has made a grab for items connected to the Gotham Project. And although high-level espionage isn't the Joker's usual business, they think that he's being manipulated by someone higher up. And if you think the Joker being manipulated is unlikely, wait till you see who they think's doing it. You haven't guessed already, have you? It's millionaire playboy Bruce Wayne. Steve says, why on earth would you think that he would be involved in this? That's what we're all thinking. Apparently, it's because he is too clean. No one could be that rich without some dodgy dealings in the background. But I'm with Steve when he points out that that seems a bit flimsy. Nonetheless, the top brass want him, Steve Rogers, in his civilian guise, to become Bruce Wayne's bodyguard for a few days, just to see what he's up to, but ostensibly to protect him from the Joker's henchmen. Now, I'm no military historian, but there's something about these top brass. The way they're drawn, they're not typical John Byrne faces. I'm guessing they're basically portraits, representations of real historical figures that were high up in the US military. If you know who they are, please let me know. I would be interested to hear. Also, there is an extra element because time is against them. Steve has precisely 72 hours to confirm Bruce Wayne's involvement because at that point, a very special consignment is going to fly out from a military airport just outside of Gotham. Steve, of course, accepts the mission, but it really isn't what he was expecting. Because once he's accepted into Wayne Manor, he sticks to Bruce like glue, but it seems that he is the millionaire playboy that everyone believed he was. A great life to live for some, but for Steve Rogers, it amounts to a very boring posting. It may be boring for Steve, but it's frustrating for Bruce. He and Dick are desperate to chase down leads, to look into the Joker's involvement. But with Steve acting as a shadow, they are trapped in their civilian alter egos. And again, look at the detail in this image. What kind of mindset does it take to not only include all those books on the shelves, but to draw the bricks that are inside the fireplace? Very impressive. Steve Rogers himself is doing a bit of snooping, and he eavesdrops on Dick and Bruce's conversation. As much as he doesn't hear them talking about being Batman and Robin, he does hear Bruce say that he's going to have to find a way to shed Private Rogers and keep his appointment with the Joker. Steve sees this as proof that his bosses were right. Oh no, don't do this to me. The following night, Steve covertly follows Bruce out of the mansion and to the Wayne Foundation building. Inside, it is simple for Bruce Wayne to get past the friendly security guard, who, judging by the way he speaks, is either Irish or Yoda. But to be fair, Steve doesn't find it much more difficult himself, although his approach is different. Then, as Bruce takes the private lift up to his penthouse suite, Steve is left with no other option than to climb the last few floors before announcing himself in true superhero fashion with a smashed window, believing that he has found Bruce red-handed. Here we go. They just can't help themselves, can they? Steve's dynamic entrance meets an equally dynamic response from Bruce, and the pair engage in actually a very impressive little battle over the next 2 pages, neither really landing a blow as they repeatedly block and counter each other's moves. A lot like they did in the JLA Avengers crossover, actually. Plus, I suppose I should mention that they also crossed paths in the Marvel vs. DC series. The fact that a normal soldier seems to be the equal of someone as highly trained as Bruce leads him to the obvious conclusion. Who else could do that other than Captain America? And 2 people who are allies in their costumed forms now formalise their alliance in their civilian guises. I suppose we should catch up with the Joker. He isn't happy because the city has been closed as tight as a drum the last couple of days, in his words, and no one has even seen Batman or Robin. Plus, he needs to report in to his colleague. The identity of his colleague is hidden in shadow. The pair of them swap their frustrations at the arrival of Captain America on the scene, and the guy in shadow reminds the Joker that he is going to be rewarded generously for carrying out his part in their scheme. He also informs the Joker that the prototype is being shipped out of Gotham tonight. Once the Joker is in possession of that, it will be a simple task to blackmail Gotham City into handing over $1 million. You're not thinking of Dr. Evil at this point, are you? With the conversation at an end, we discover that the Joker's colleague was actually wearing a mask. He is, in fact, the Red Skull. Well, hold on, if it was a disguise, then why did they bother hiding him in shadow? That makes no sense. Later that night, we catch up with some military personnel. They are guarding the route through which someone or something called Fat Boy is soon going to pass. Whilst they're talking about how cold it is and what a boring duty this is, they begin to laugh, uncontrollably, before eventually keeling over, rictus grins fixed to their faces. And when the military convoy arrives with Fat Boy, it doesn't take long before they too begin to laugh. We then visit the Batcave, and what a Batcave. Another supremely detailed image. A full-page splash shows us all the joys of Bruce Wayne's HQ. We've got the Bat plane, the Bat submarine, I'm guessing, the Batmobile, and look, far down in the bowels of the cave, that's got to be the Bat boat, hasn't it? And bank upon bank of computers and electrical equipment. It's here that all 4 of our heroes are reunited, and Batman explains that in spite of the Joker's very checkered history, he just doesn't have the intelligence sources to gather information about an atomic weapons project. And remember the clue that Batman found in the Joker-mobile earlier in the comic? Well, he finally tells us what that was. It was a scrap of plutonium. And he says the fact that the Joker was driving around with radioactive material just shows that it's not something that he's familiar with. And he thinks there's somebody else behind it all. Captain America agrees. He thinks there's somebody else behind it all, and he's got a sinking feeling that he knows who that person may be. We are told that Hitler abandoned his own version of the Gotham project. But if he knew that there was a working prototype in Gotham City, he would do whatever he could to get his hands on it. And he wouldn't be above employing the likes of the Joker. Our heroes then follow up on a few leads, which sees them pairing up in unconventional couples. For example, Batman is with Bucky and Captain America is with Robin, which is a fun little thing to see. It's during the course of those investigations that we see Captain America and Robin drop in on Commissioner Gordon, giving us this interesting image of a very stiff-looking and probably gravity-defying Captain America. We had another similar stiff, undynamic image earlier. We can see what they're supposed to be doing, but there's just no movement in their bodies. Nothing to suggest that Bruce has just leapt onto that table from the floor, or that Cap has folded his body through that window and then straightened it out. I love John Byrne as a writer and an artist, but yeah, these bits aren't his best work. The result of these investigations is that they confirm the Red Skull's involvement, and they discover that, far from being a blackmail plot, the plan is to drop the bomb on Washington, D.C. How did they confirm that the Red Skull was involved? Simple. They were captured by him. Or at least Batman and Bucky are, after taking on some of his flunkies and getting gassed. As they come to, it's Steve Rogers we hear saying that the Joker has allied himself with the one man who may be crazier than he is. Nah. Actually, it's an interesting little scene here between Batman and the Red Skull, because after introducing himself, the Red Skull says that Batman's reputation for escaping the most insidious traps has reached even Germany. He's obviously a fan of the TV show. He explains that the hoist to which Batman and Bucky are secured is timed to descend as soon as he and his men have reached a safe distance. That will trigger an explosion, killing them both. Hold on, I thought he'd seen the show. Rule 1, you never leave Batman and assume he's going to die. I mean, look, the very first panel after he drives off, it's clear that Batman has already freed himself. But when the bomb detonates, the Red Skull assumes he's been successful. In case it was unclear, it is the Joker that is now in control of Fat Boy, and he takes it to the military airfield. Once there, he rendezvous with the Red Skull's extraordinary personal plane. The Red Skull is impressed with the Joker's efforts and tells him that Hitler himself will award him one of Germany's highest honours. At this point, the Joker is surprisingly shocked, as he realises that the Red Skull isn't wearing that get-up as a disguise. He is a genuine, bona fide Nazi. Now, I was thinking that it made perfect sense for the Joker to be in league with Nazis. However, it seems I was wrong, because he is seriously offended. He says, "I may be a criminal lunatic, but I'm an American criminal lunatic." He isn't an American though, is he? He's his own man, his own entity. He certainly never struck me as the patriotic type. Then we get another trope of the intercompany crossover, which is the two main villains falling out, normally due to an inferiority or superiority complex. Here, it's the Joker's hatred of Nazis and the Red Skull's disdain at the Joker's misplaced patriotism. They try to use their own signature biological weapons on each other, but discover that they are too similar in nature and are ineffective. Although the same can't be said for the Red Skull's men and what they've done to the Joker's gang. It's also a very straightforward approach that puts the Joker to sleep. Too simplistic for him, surely. Then the Red Skull is asked, shall his henchman finish him off? To which the answer is obviously no. He's going to be taken to Berlin and paraded through the streets as an example of the kind of freakish monsters that America has bred. With the Joker and Fat Boy loaded onto the Red Skull's plane, they head off in the direction of DC. But there's a problem. They are being followed by an ugly plane and it is closing fast. On board, Captain America tells Batman that the speed that he can get out of that crate is very impressive. Yeah, especially when it's so unaerodynamic. Batman then explains how he had escaped earlier. He said that he realised that the gas that he and Bucky were subjected to wasn't lethal. That gave him the opportunity to get his nose filters out, pretend to be unconscious, and then he just expanded his chest, flexed his muscles whilst he was being tied down, and then once the baddies left the warehouse, he just relaxed and he could easily slip out from his bonds. Okay, fair enough. Now the Bat plane has clamped onto the Red Skull's plane long enough for the two older heroes to board it, just in time before the Bat plane is shrugged off, drawing a yike from inside it. Yike? What, singular? That's different. You can imagine what's going on inside the Red Skull's plane now. I'll still show you anyway. As Cap and Batman go to work on the crew, again, it isn't particularly difficult for them, although there is a slight complication when the Red Skull locks himself in the loading bay and prepares to drop the bomb. They may not have made it to DC, but this will do just fine. He is, however, forgetting that there is another unconscious form in there with him. By this point, Cap has managed to fight his way into the cockpit so that he can steer the plane out to sea and hopefully safety. And here's a phrase I never thought I'd say. It's the Joker to the rescue. Because having regained consciousness, he is doing his darndest to thwart the Red Skull's plans. And the Red Skull is doing his darndest to put a bullet in his head. And the Joker's still coming out with this patriotic nonsense. The two of them end up wrestling on top of the bomb and are still there when it drops. Now that would be a fitting way for two such infamous villains to die, wouldn't it? But I dare say it won't even detonate. Damn. As you can see, our heroes have managed to stay ahead of Ground Zero. They are okay, and even their young sidekicks have landed safely. So our heroes survived. The bomb, although detonated, did so at sea, and the villains are dead. Or are they? Because as Batman says, at least they've seen the last of the Joker and the Red Skull. Cap says, you don't really believe that, do you? To which Batman replies, no, Captain. I'm afraid I don't. But the tale isn't quite over yet, because we have an epilogue set 20 years later, where we join the Bat submarine in the North Atlantic. Batman and Robin are having a discussion, wherein Batman says, what is it, Bruce? I assume a typo. And Robin says that the sonar has picked up something unusual in the ice flow ahead. Something biological trapped in the ice. It appears to be a person in perfect suspended animation. We get another typo as Robin refers to Batman as Dick, and then we see who it is that they have discovered. It's Captain America, because in this reality, they are the ones that found him and recovered him from the ice, not the Avengers, as we are more familiar with. And then we discover that those typos weren't typos at all, because as has been said, it's 20 years later, and now Dick Grayson is Batman, and Bruce Wayne Jr., the son of the original Batman, is filling the role of Robin. Bruce Wayne Sr. is still around, enjoying retirement, one assumes, and they all agree that it's fortunate that Steve has come back to them right now, just when the world needs a figure like Captain America. Well, I can see why John Byrne is so proud of this, but it feels more like a beginning than an end. So, what next? What next indeed? John Byrne was rather fond of this Elseworld that he had created, and he planned to follow it up with a team-up between the Justice Society of America and the Invaders, also set in the Golden Age. However, he has said that neither Marvel nor DC were particularly interested in that idea, so instead he expanded the ideas behind this Elseworld and created the Superman and Batman Generations series, a centuries-spanning trilogy of limited series that followed its two stars' adventures from 1939 to the 30th century. As for John Byrne himself, he of course continued to produce work in the comic book world well into the 21st century, and continued to make headlines. For better or worse, you always know when a new John Byrne book is on the spinner rack. He even had a go at relaunching another iconic character, when he helped to kick off Volume 2 of The Amazing Spider-Man at the end of the 20th century. That was after he had retconned the Arachnid's origin story in Spider-Man Chapter 1. I guess, one way or another, both of those would make interesting subjects for future episodes.